Good evening, Dr. Jones, fellow students from Norfolk State University, and distinguished guests. My name is Ryan Gorell, and how many of you remember what you were doing on September 10th, 2001? I don't. But how about that same question one day later? I'm here to discuss with you why the physical reasons as to why the Twin Towers fell on September 11th, 2001. I chose to discuss this topic because 9/11 has had a very important effect on my life, and while it is surrounded in controversy, blame, and conspiracy, there are only so many facts about that day, and the fact that the tower did fall is one that I wish to look into more deeply. The architectural structure of the building itself, the heat from the fire, and the physical damage from the impact of the planes are a couple of the topics I'm going to be discussing with you today. Let me first talk to you about how the Twin Towers were constructed and how that ultimately led to their collapsing. The 110-story buildings were constructed by 244 pods and pillars on the outside, and 56 towers and pods on the inside. So it was basically a tube within a tube. This structure, the way that they were set up, was a egg crate design. So I'll show you here. Okay, this is an egg crate design, which was to maximize strength upwards and horizontally from impact. Okay, this design allowed the building to sway and withstand enormous horizontal pressure, even up to hurricane force winds of up to 225 miles per hour. So, in theory, it could have taken the impact of an airliner, which I'll discuss a little bit later. Okay, like I said, the building's design was meant for maximum strength and flexibility horizontally and vertically, okay, because of its height and its enormous footprint on the ground itself. So it wasn't steady so much on the ground, but it was steady in the air, which is an interesting architectural feat. Okay, when the planes crashed into the towers, one of the things the planes did was damage a significant number of these beams and then these internal beams. While it was designed to have some of the beams taken out, the other ones would compensate. But it took the planes, when they crashed, took out too many of the beams, and the other ones couldn't compensate, and that ultimately led to the towers falling down. So while they could sustain some of the impact, they couldn't sustain the maximum impact that was inflicted on the buildings, which caused them to fall. Okay, and as I mentioned earlier, another one of the reasons that the towers fell was because of the intense heat from the fire. Okay, let me elaborate on that real quick. According to Jackie Craven's article on About.com Architecture, the temperature and intensity of the fire was upwards of 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit. This is nowhere near the melting point of steel. However, it is hot enough to weaken the supporting beams. The force of the plane crashing into the towers instantly ignited the 10,000 gallons of fuel, which engulfed several floors of the buildings almost instantaneously. And then, according to Thomas Edgar and Christopher Musso's articles in the December 2001 Journal of Materials Management magazine, the towers were able to support a massive fire. So they could have handled a regular fire, several floors, the whole building, in fact, for up to 3 hours. Okay, but this fire happened instantaneously. Regular fire engulfs slowly. It starts taking over things. It climbs up the building. It goes. The building had fireproofing that would have sustained that. But this flame and this fire was so intense and burned so quickly and so hotly, even though it's not really a word, that it engulfed multiple floors, basically creating an inferno instantly, and the building wasn't able to sustain that. That fire weakened those supporting structures, those supporting beams that I was talking about, those steel beams that would have been able to hold the building up. But the fire itself weakened those beams to the point that they didn't melt, but they weakened, and then the building basically just fell on itself. Okay? And my last item that I'm here to discuss about is the impact of the planes and the actual impact the planes had on the towers themselves. As I said, the towers were designed to withstand sustained winds of over 225 miles per hour, which is that of a Class 5 hurricane. And the actual impact of the plane was overall significantly less force than the building's maximum impact limit. The issue that arose is that when the planes hit, they sliced into the buildings and did more damage than the building was able to sustain, as I talked about in the beginning of my presentation. Okay, so you can see here, the plane went into the tower, okay, and it impacted these internal structural beams and the external structural beams that were designed to withstand an impact like that. It's just simply that it was just too much damage done. It exceeded their maximum capacity for sustaining the structure. Okay. Right now I'm going to pause real quick and ask if anybody has any questions. Are there any questions out there? Yes, ma'am.
If the towers were so big, why wasn't the pile of rubble bigger?
Okay, so that's actually a really good question. Thank you very much. What I'm going to talk about real quick is the building itself. Like I said, these pillars are what held the building together. But if you think about the way that the Twin Towers were set up, is that they were office spaces. So there was these vast spaces of open space, open air. Okay, 95% of the building was air. In fact, these pillars were only about 2 or 3 feet big on each of them. And you think the entire footprint of the Twin Tower, each tower was 64 meters. That's about 180 feet. So if you think of the way that breaks down around the perimeter, it creates, like I said, those huge pockets of air in each floor. Each floor by itself was less than 3% filled. 97% open. Each floor. And that statistic makes the building 95% air. So when it collapsed, you only had a pile of rubble only a few stories high. There was no need. It just compacted on itself, and then your pile of rubble was that only 5% of what the building was actually made of materials. Thank you very much. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Why did the towers tip over when they fell?
Okay. So the towers. Let me look back real quick here. If you look at them, okay, they were stacked. Basically, it's the same footprint like most skyscrapers, I should say. They were a square like a Jenga tower. If you look at it, okay, they were square all the way to the top. The only thing that was not square was the very top antenna there. Otherwise, it was square, and each level was relatively the same. So when these pillars gave out, they gave out basically and just squashed themselves, and then the tower just pancaked on itself. And it moved downwards with such force and velocity. You have 93rd and 98th floors out of 110. So you had several, if not, several dozen floors above where the impact zones were, which caused. Let me go back to this one. There you go. You can see here, you had all these floors here and here just impacting, basically falling a whole, 3 or 4 stories down at one time. So when they gave way, when these impact zones gave way, they gave way at the same time. They crushed. And when it crushed, this force, as you can see right here, fell straight down onto the remaining structures and just collapsed the building on top of itself. There was enough force downward that it didn't need any force left or right or horizontally. Okay, so it didn't tip. It just went straight down. Thank you very much. Okay, so this is my last visual aid here. Like I said, you can see where the impact zones were. And everybody up here was trapped by the fire and the flames. With the fire, like I said, burned so intensely that it actually just melted. It didn't melt, but it weakened those structures, which caused it to fall down on itself in a sequential structure. Which actually, if you look at the smoke from the fires, it actually puffs out in little puffs, which is each floor collapsing as it goes down. So in conclusion, as I said in response to your question, there was no wind on September 11, 2001, which is fortunate because the buildings would have tipped over. Okay, if there had been significant winds, because there were these big imprints in the air, these towers that were sustaining these winds, there had been wind, it would have tipped over, which would have caused much more damage, because it would have affected the other buildings in the area, even though many of the buildings in the area were affected. Okay, the combination of the plane's size, the plane's inertia, and the burning of the jet fuel, which weakened the steel beams, and the structural integrity of the building itself, all equated to the failure of the towers to withstand, to withstand the devastating effects of the 2 fully loaded jumbo jets and the impact of them at over 250 miles per hour, which resulted in the ultimate collapse and destruction of the towers. Thank you for your time.